This isn't just a story about war. It's about how a little girl's light, her laughter, her innocence was extinguished in a place where justice had become as scarce as food and mercy. A 7-year-old named Heaven Awot, whose name meant radiance, was subjected to one of the most vile acts imaginable, not by an enemy soldier, but by her own uncle. And what followed, the betrayal, the cover-up, and the community's response, is almost too disturbing to believe. When we talk about war, most people picture bullets flying through broken skies, cities reduced to dust, soldiers battling for control. But beneath the chaos and the shadows of conflict, something far more insidious takes shape. War opens the door not just to destruction, but to monsters. And in the ruins of a divided Ethiopia, one of those monsters didn't carry a weapon. He carried a family name and a secret. This uncle, he didn't just want to harm her, he wanted everyone to see it. Even worse, he nearly got away with it. And when Heaven's mother, a nurse, a survivor, a woman who had already lost so much, dared to demand justice, she became the next target. This case is one of the most catastrophic and psychologically disturbing we've ever covered. It forces us to ask, in a world broken by conflict, who protects the most vulnerable? And what happens when silence becomes a weapon too? Let me know in the comments. If justice becomes a threat, what hope is left for accountability? You're watching True Crimes by Dominic, where every story is real, raw, and unforgettable. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a case. New stories drop every 2 days, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's take a deeper look at the horrifying truth behind the name Heaven Awot. There's a reason Heaven's story echoes in the hearts of anyone who hears it. It's more than just another case. It's a chilling reminder of how innocent lives can be torn apart in the shadows of conflict, injustice, and evil. When war swept through the region, Heaven, just a child, was among the many who lost everything. Her family, like countless others, shattered. Her father, a man of Tigrayan descent, was taken by the federal government and thrown into prison. Why? That remains a mystery. Maybe he was part of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Or maybe he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. What we do know is this: when he was finally released, he didn't feel safe, so he fled to Tigray. But he didn't take his family with him. He left them behind. That decision left Heaven's mother alone, suddenly a single mom raising 2 young girls, trying to stay afloat in a world that offered them little protection. As for Heaven's father, his name, his face, his story beyond this is largely unknown. In the grand scheme of this heartbreaking tale, he's a faint shadow. But still, one can't help but wonder, would things have turned out differently if the family had stayed together? In the city of Bahir Dar, Heaven and her mother found shelter. They ended up renting a place from a man named Getnet. It seemed like a safe arrangement. Heaven's aunt, just 15 years old, was married to Getnet, and that connection made her mother feel somewhat reassured. There was no red flag, no warning signs, until August 1st, 2023. That morning, Heaven's mom, Abekula, had to leave for work. Like many days before, she left her daughters in the care of Heaven's aunt, Getnet's young wife. Everything seemed normal. Heaven stepped away, saying she needed to use the bathroom. But minutes passed, then more, and she never came back. Panic set in. Her aunt started searching. Maybe she got distracted, wandered off, or went looking for something. But deep down, something didn't feel right. And no one, absolutely no one, could have prepared themselves for the horror that followed. While everyone was searching, Heaven had already been lured away. Getnet had taken her to a secluded spot. What happened there is difficult to put into words, but it must be said, for her and for the truth to be known. He sexually assaulted her. To silence her, he shoved handfuls of sand into her mouth so she couldn't scream. The trauma was so brutal, so inhuman that her tiny body suffered unimaginable damage. Her muscles were torn from within, her spine partially protruded. The sand in her mouth had mixed with blood and saliva, forming a thick cement-like paste. And he wasn't done. To cover his tracks, Getnet strangled her. She was so small, he only needed one hand, just 5 fingers, to snuff out her life. Then, in a sickening attempt to erase the evidence, he poured a bucket of bleach over her, trying to wash away the blood. He even took a razor to her body. But perhaps the cruelest part was where he left her. He laid her lifeless body at the doorstep, right under a balcony, deliberately positioning her in a spot where she'd be found. Not hidden, not buried, but displayed. It was as if he wanted her mother, her neighbors, her little sister, to see what he had done. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't a stranger or an adult who found her. It was Heaven's 3-year-old sister. Imagine that, a toddler stumbling upon something no child should ever witness. Heaven was rushed to the Amman General Hospital, but it was too late. She was already gone. The doctors were shaken, nurses cried, even the janitors and security guards were in tears. They had never seen anything like it. And her mother, Abekula, was held back at first. The state of her daughter's body was too gruesome. But eventually she saw her, and what she saw confirmed what her heart already knew. She was a nurse herself. She'd seen all kinds of injuries. But this wasn't a fall. This wasn't an accident. Her daughter had been violently assaulted and left like trash. The bruises around Heaven's neck told the truth. Clear marks of strangulation. The internal injuries spoke louder than words ever could. But here's what makes it worse. Getnet was there. He stood in that home, watching the chaos he created. His wife cried alongside the family. But him? He showed no emotion, no tears, no apology, not a single word of comfort. Just silence. He tried to sell the lie that Heaven had fallen from the balcony, but her mother wasn't buying it. No one with even basic medical knowledge would. And she knew this wasn't just murder. It was a message meant for her. Police soon turned their eyes toward Getnet. His whereabouts during Heaven's disappearance were unclear, suspiciously so. They arrested him, but before justice could be served, he escaped. How? The prison where he was held was filled with detained members of the Amhara militia, and one night, chaos erupted. The militia staged a breakout to free their own, and in that madness, Getnet slipped away. But he didn't go quietly. He began threatening Abekula. He said he'd come for her surviving daughter. Fearing for their lives, they went into hiding. Abekula had to give up her nursing job, and every job after that. She and her little girl kept moving, never staying in one place too long, never truly safe. Now, if you're watching this from the US or any country with a functioning justice system, this next part may be hard to understand. A man who assaulted and murdered a child, escaped prison, and threatened the victim's family. You'd think he'd be public enemy number 1, right? But not here. Despite the horrific nature of his crimes, Getnet wasn't even a priority for law enforcement. He remained free, and the lives of those he terrorized, they were left in the balance. Even after Getnet was finally hauled back into police custody, Abekulis couldn't breathe easy. Her nightmare didn't end with the arrest. It only changed shape. For weeks she lived in fear, constantly looking over her shoulder. Getnet's family had picked up where he left off, hurling threats and intimidation her way, determined to silence her even after the court had stepped in. Eventually, the case reached the High Court in Behirdar, and while there was a sense of anticipation, hope even, that justice would finally be served, what followed was something else entirely. Getnet was sentenced to 25 years in prison, no parole, no second chances, but also no life sentence. The public's reaction? Absolute outrage. To many, 25 years for what he did to little Heaven Awot wasn't justice. It was a slap in the face. People were furious. The Ethiopian Women Lawyers Association voiced what so many were feeling. In a powerful public statement that echoed far beyond the country's borders, they said, and this was quoted by international outlets, that the murder alone should have warranted life imprisonment, if not the death penalty. especially because the victim was a child, especially because the violence was so horrifying, so beyond comprehension. But the High Court didn't see it that way. In their official ruling, they concluded, and I quote, "The child died as a result of the defendant's violence and strangulation when he raped her because she was too young to withstand the pressure." Try to wrap your head around that. How that justification resulted in anything less than the harshest penalty is something no one could understand. And honestly, there's no explanation that would make sense. Even Ethiopia's own Minister for Women, Children and Youth, Dr. Ergogi Tesfaye, couldn't stay silent. She expressed her deep condolences on Facebook and promised to pursue further legal action. Her message, translated from Amharic, struck a chord. To protect the rights and safety of children across our nation, the ministry is working with the proper authorities to shield vulnerable children from the social dangers occurring in different areas. We are building systems to prevent violence and ensure children receive the comprehensive support they need. In partnership with UNICEF, we are rolling out a digital case management system to monitor children's welfare even at the local level. On behalf of the ministry and myself, I extend my deepest sympathies for the unspeakable, inhumane crime committed against Heaven. Although the court has ruled, we remain committed to following this case closely. But this wasn't just a national outcry. Heaven's name spread like wildfire across the globe. Her story crossed oceans, appearing in international headlines and haunting people thousands of miles away. Even celebrity voices joined the call for justice. Cardi B shared one of the 3 Change.org petitions circulating at the time. That single petition, over 200,000 people signed it. Today that number's grown to over 300,000. The other 2 petitions, one sitting at 10,000 signatures, the other over 20,000, are still active, still gathering support, still screaming into the void for something harsher, something that feels like real justice. The petitions weren't just about Getnet's punishment. They were about protection, about safety for Abakulis, who was still being harassed by Getnet's relatives. Even after the court had spoken, her fight wasn't over. And the public's frustration deepened when Getnet dared to file an appeal. That case is currently scheduled to resume in October 2024, but there's been radio silence since August. No updates, no clarity. Let's not forget, Ethiopia's legal system does allow for the death penalty, and they've used it before. The last reported case involved a military officer convicted of assassinating a high-ranking security official. He pleaded for clemency. The court denied him. He was sentenced to death, most likely by firing squad, as per Ethiopian law. So why was Getnet spared that fate? Some Ethiopian activists and humanitarians believe they know why. They argue that Heaven's mixed heritage may have played a part in how she was treated, as if she were somehow seen as less worthy of justice. That Getnet may have viewed her as disposable. We may never know if that played into his actions. He still claims innocence. But honestly, does the motive even matter when the result is this evil? Meanwhile, outrage kept growing, not just about this case, but the bigger picture. The Ethiopian government found itself under fire, accused of turning a blind eye to rising violence against women and girls, especially in the aftermath of regional conflicts. A searing editorial from the Addis Standard called this pattern the cycle of silence, and it didn't pull any punches. It condemned the government's consistent failure to investigate, prosecute, or punish crimes like this. Crimes that leave scars on entire communities. What is most alarming, the article stated, is the inaction. Despite the documentation from international groups, the reports, the news, the impunity these criminals enjoy doesn't just allow sexual violence to persist. It tells the world that this behavior is acceptable, that it will be ignored, that war makes it easier to get away with. One chilling truth kept coming up again and again throughout the story, and in so many true crime cases. If it weren't for Ash, for Heaven's mother, this case might have disappeared. It wasn't the government or the police or even the courts that made Heaven's name known. It was a grieving mother who refused to let her daughter's story be buried. A mother who fought through death threats, silence, and bureaucracy to make the world see what had happened. So, the media didn't pick up Heaven's case until the court had already ruled. But by then, Abakulis's work had already reached thousands. It was her strength that moved people to action. And the result? A candlelight vigil organized by members of the Ethiopian Women Lawyers Association. It was held at Grove Garden Walk in Addis Ababa, a public space near Mekelle Square. Hundreds showed up. People who had never met heaven, people carrying flowers, candles, and grief in their hearts. But their mourning was cut short. As they gathered, federal police swept through and pushed them away, saying they weren't allowed to be there. It was as if even their sorrow was being silenced. But they refused to go home. A small, determined group found another location and stood their ground. One of them was a woman named Bethlehem Tedessa. She recorded the vigil and uploaded the video to TikTok under the name Sparklish. Her caption reads like a call to arms. Yesterday, we gathered at Grove Garden Walk for a candle vigil for heaven, a moment meant to honor her memory and raise our voices against gender-based violence. Hundreds came, only to be turned away, told it was canceled. But we stayed. We came for something bigger than ourselves. Dressed in black, our hearts heavy with grief, we were met with disrespect, with laughter, with loud music trying to drown us out. But we did not leave defeated. We found another space. We cried, we mourned, and in our grief, we found strength. We formed a WhatsApp group, a place to share, to organize, to fight back. A place where justice isn't just a word, it's a mission. We are building something powerful, a community of women who won't back down, who won't be quiet, not until justice is done. We are here, and they are here. Heaven Awot's story didn't end in that courtroom, and as long as her name is spoken, as long as her story is told, it never will. It's impossible to talk about the tragic story of Heaven without diving into the powerful role that social media, especially TikTok, played in how her case unraveled in the public eye. As Heaven's story spread like wildfire, millions were heartbroken, but not everyone responded with empathy. While the world grieved for a 7-year-old girl who endured unimaginable horrors, a darker conversation was brewing. Some voices online, instead of showing compassion, began to push conspiracy theories claiming the widespread media coverage of Heaven's case was just a distraction. They believed it was a deliberate ploy to shift attention away from the Ethiopian government's treatment of the Amhara people. To them, the sympathy was part of a coordinated media cover-up. Among the most controversial of these voices was Moda Coreno, a social media content creator and political activist known for covering the civil war in Tigray and its aftermath. Instead of mourning Heaven, Moda used his platform to stir outrage. Because Heaven's father was of Tigrayan ethnicity, Moda shockingly claimed that she deserved what happened to her. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, he said her mother should have faced the same fate, all because she married across ethnic lines. To many, these comments were a new low, even for someone with a reputation like Moda's. He'd already been a divisive figure online, but this time the backlash was immediate and fierce. TikTok users began mass reporting his profile. Eventually, moderators stepped in. Most of his content, including the video where he made these comments and a follow-up apology, were taken down. Only fragments remain today, mostly through re-uploads by third-party accounts. But Moda wasn't the only one. Another unnamed creator, reportedly based in Ethiopia, made similar remarks. According to scattered reports, this man was attacked in the streets, allegedly in retaliation for what he'd said about Heaven. He later issued a public apology. That incident, while not fully confirmed, mirrors the broader outrage and emotional rawness surrounding Heaven's story. Because in the eyes of many, Heaven was just a child. She was innocent, and her death felt like an attack on every vulnerable child across Ethiopia. Unfortunately, the online chaos didn't stop at hateful rhetoric. TikTok also became a breeding ground for misinformation. Some creators even used AI-generated videos to dramatize or distort the facts of Heaven's case. Many of these videos feature digitally created likenesses of Heaven, which directly violates TikTok's own guidelines, especially those protecting minors. But thanks to the platform's algorithm, this type of content gained traction, spreading fast, reaching millions, and replicating across countless profiles. By early 2025, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue released a small-scale study that revealed something deeply troubling. TikTok's automatic content moderation was failing, especially when it came to Amharic posts. Amharic is considered a low-resource language for AI, meaning moderation tools simply don't have the data to flag problematic content effectively. So while hate speech in English or other widely used languages got taken down, similar messages in Amharic often slipped through the cracks. In some cases, even when users added English translations, the presence of Amharic was enough to bypass detection. This loophole wasn't just a tech oversight, it became a weapon. Some users exploited it to spread targeted hate, particularly against Ethiopian activists who dared to speak out in support of Heaven and her family. These activists, like her mother, faced death threats and vicious harassment. The same level of cruelty that tried to silence her in life now tried to silence her story in death. After these revelations, TikTok responded, they announced the formation of an advisory council, and for the first time, it included an Ethiopian professor who spoke Amharic. A small but necessary step. Still, not everything about Heaven's digital legacy was grim. In fact, thousands of TikTok users stood by her. They mourned her, honored her, and joined their voices to call for justice. One of the loudest voices was Jordan Basba, an Ethiopian equal rights activist. He himself had faced hateful attacks on TikTok, but he didn't let that silence him. Jordan was credited with starting the viral hashtag #JusticeForHeaven, a movement that swept across the platform, bringing more attention to the violence women and girls face in Ethiopia. One video in particular summed up the outrage perfectly. So you mean to tell me that man is only getting 25 years for what he did to that child? A little girl who was sexually assaulted, mutilated, and murdered? That's it? The pain in the voices of creators was real. The disbelief, the fury, but also the hope that sharing Heaven's story might spark something bigger, something lasting. Heaven's mother, still in mourning, still carrying the weight of grief, remained a vocal force for change. I know there are so many Heavens, she said, her voice shaking. As a former healthcare worker, she had seen firsthand what violence looked like. But this was different. This was her baby. I can't sleep. I can't forget. People ask me to move on, but how? My daughter had no guilt, no sin. I used to come home and she'd run to hug me at the door. Mommy, she'd say with the biggest smile. She was never sick. Then one day she was just gone. Not by God, but in the most horrific way. She kept going. For her younger daughter, just a toddler when Heaven died, and for the countless other girls who couldn't speak for themselves. By the end of 2024, however, the media had largely moved on. Abacles, Heaven's mother, stepped away from the spotlight. We don't know much about her now, and Heaven's father? He never spoke to the press. It's possible he went into hiding, perhaps from shame, fear, or heartbreak. We may never know. And then there's Heaven's little sister. She would be about 5 years old today. Maybe she remembers the horror of finding her sister's body. Maybe she doesn't. But she will always feel the echo of that day in the tears of her mother, in the silence left behind, and perhaps one day in the words she might choose to speak. Strangely, Getnet's wife, Heaven's own aunt, stood by him throughout the investigation. She even defended him publicly. Despite overwhelming public outrage, she claimed Heaven had died from a fall, not a violent act. As of 2024, she still believed that story. But Heaven's legacy didn't end in silence. It sang. 2 tribute songs were released in her memory. One titled Heaven Awot by Zane Outlander, and another by the Wings music band called Galawa. In an interview with Rolling Hype, Zane said, "When I wrote Heaven Awot, I wasn't just making music. I was honoring a child whose life was stolen and speaking for those who can no longer speak." The Wings music band is part of the Ethiopian organization Wings Education and Media, which works to empower children and advocate for women's rights. On International Women's Day, they performed Galawa in front of government officials and public servants, turning their grief into something powerful, something that might just protect the next Heaven. As of this recording, in April 2025, the shadows of war still hang heavy over Ethiopia's Tigray region. The threat of renewed conflict with neighboring Eritrea, once an ally, now on the verge of becoming an adversary, is real and looming. If tensions escalate, this land, already soaked in grief, could become a battlefield once more. And in that chaos, it won't just be borders or politics at stake, it'll be lives. Families torn apart, children forced to witness horrors no child should ever know. Just like Heaven. Heaven's story is not just a tragedy, it's a warning, a reminder that violence doesn't just end when the cameras stop rolling or when the trial is over. The echoes live on in mothers who can't sleep, in sisters too young to understand what they've lost, in communities struggling to find meaning through unbearable pain. The world may have moved on, the headlines may have faded, but her mother hasn't, and maybe neither should we. So here's the question I want to leave you with tonight. What do we owe the victims whose names we only learn after it's too late? What justice looks like for Heaven may still be unclear, but what justice could look like for the next little girl that's still in our hands? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your voice matters. If Heaven's story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel something, please share it. Someone else needs to hear it too. Don't forget to subscribe to True Crimes by Dominic for more real, haunting, and human stories like this one. We drop new investigations every 2 days. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Until then, take care of yourself. And remember, some stories demand to be told, no matter how hard they are to hear. This was True Crimes by Dominic.